So now the lady has spoken, we can get going. So welcome everybody to this Your Skills session on systematic reviews, transferring your search between databases. So I'm going to be doing this session with my colleague Amy. My name is Marion. So Amy, if you want to say anything.
Hello everyone, thanks for coming along this morning. I'll give you a bit more of an introduction to myself when we get to my bit.
So just to say, obviously we are recording the session, so if you do have any questions, then do please feel free to put them into the chat and we'll get to those at the end. We will be doing a little bit of swapping between screens, so do bear with us, but the nature of what we're doing does require a bit of that. So let's get going with today's session with a bit of a roadmap of where we're going. So first of all, we're going to start with constructing a search strategy in Medline. If we're going to transfer a search, then we need to have a search to transfer. We are assuming a little bit of experience on your part in terms of doing some searching, but we will start with a search in Medline and then we'll look at how you would transfer that search to Embase and then to Scopus of Web of Science. And then at the end, we'll have some other hints and tips for you. So for this session, we're going to be using this sample question, which is, what has been published in English since 2011 on the relationship between social media use and adolescent mental well-being? So hopefully, if you're not FMS, it's a question that we can all kind of get our heads around. It's something that we all understand. So before we decide on how we're going to search this question using one of the databases, what we need to do is think about the words that we're going to use. And it's always a good idea before you start to break down the question in some way. So this is an example of how you could do that. So thinking about your question in terms of the various subjects or concepts. So subject number one would be the social media aspect. So looking at alternative words, synonyms, other ways that that thing could be described, we've come up with Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, social networking, Web 2.0. So that's the first concept, and there might be others. And as we get into the searching, we might discover other things that we haven't known about or things that we've forgotten about. So then moving on to subject or concept number two, that's the mental health or well-being part of the search. So we might want to think of things like anxiety or anxious or self-image, self-esteem. And again, there might be more. And the third concept, adolescence. So alternatives for adolescents, teenagers, young people, youth. Those are the kind of words that we've come up with. Other things that you might want to think about down here at the bottom, is there a population group? Well, it's actually in our question, so we don't need to think about that one. What type of publications are we interested in? Journal articles, and also language. Are we interested in language? And have we got any restrictions to the date? Now, what I would say is, obviously, this session is on transferring your search for a systematic review. And generally, with a systematic review, you wouldn't have a date. You would be starting at the beginning and systematically searching everything that there was. But there might be an occasion where a date would be something that you could apply. So that's one way of breaking down the question. And then another way might be do it in this sort of format. You know, for some people it works better. So you start with the actual concept, say what it is, and then look at all the alternatives. So that's just another way that we could break down the question. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Amy, who's going to start us off with the first database search, which is in Medline, which is using the controlled vocabulary. So I shall stop sharing and hand over to Amy. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Marion, for kicking us off and introducing us to the topic. Good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for coming along this morning. My name's Amy Cook, and I'm one of Marion's colleagues up here in the Walton Library in FMS. We teach a lot of these sessions on different databases, building searches, things like that. And we also see a lot of PGR students and research staff for one-to-ones on building search strategies for systematic review and transferring searches across databases. So we like to think we see the kind of problems that people have. We know where people get stuck with this thing, and we're looking to kind of address some of the frequently asked questions or the things that tend to trip people up when they're in the process of transferring their search. Now, as Marion said, we are assuming some familiarity with these databases. By no means are we expecting you to be experts on them. I mean, who is an expert on any of these databases? After all, we certainly don't think we're 100% experts on these. So we're not assuming that you know these databases inside out, but we'd like to think that you probably know about their existence. You've heard of them. You've perhaps put them down in your protocol if you're designing your protocol for your systematic review. But we realized very quickly as we were designing this that we would need to show you some of the differences in the interfaces, because that tends to be what trips people up as they are transferring. So yeah, we will be showing you a little bit of the functionality, but if at any point you think, oh, actually, I'd like to know a bit more about these databases, do ask us at the end, do get in touch, and we can signpost you to some of our other recordings or some of our resources that we have to give you a bit more in-depth training on those. So as Marion said, I'm going to be starting with Medline through Ovid. I'll make sure I can share my screen. That's always a good start, isn't it? Share. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see Medline on the screen in front. So one of the reasons we're starting with Medline, a couple of reasons here. So it is one of the largest clinical medicine databases that we subscribe to. So for our FMS colleagues, this will be one that you'll have heard of before. It's a really good starting place. But wider than that, more broadly, it has one of the more complex controlled vocabularies behind it. And I'll say a little bit more about what I mean by that and the implications of controlled vocabulary searching for systematic review in just a second. But in a nutshell, it's a really good place to start your search because it forces you to interrogate your research question before you launch into a very detailed search strategy composition. And that's really important because it's much easier to fit a complex search into a more simple interface than it is to do the other way around and realize that you've missed out a few points, or actually perhaps you need to change the focus of your question and so on. So this is why we always recommend quite strongly, quite heartily, that this is a good place to start when it comes to building up your search strategy. So without further ado, if we kick off in Medline. So Ovid is an umbrella database. It houses several different databases, and Marion's going to pick up on another one of these in just a second. And the very first thing to say is you'll notice that there are checkboxes down the side of all these different databases and their different data sets. And of course, that makes the temptation to tick several of these almost irresistible, because you would think, well, why should I search these one by one when I can just go in and get more bang for my buck by searching them concurrently? Our first warning here is please don't do that. You will lose a lot of the complex functionality that makes these such good databases to start your search on. So we do want you to look at them one at a time, especially for systematic review, where it is very important to make sure that you're using all of those complex functionalities. So the data set that I'm going to choose is this second one from the top, Ovid, Medline and InProcess, in data review and other non-index citations. And you can see the date range there is from 1946 all the way to current date. Now, this is a long-winded, complicated description of a data set in librarian speak. To translate that into more reasonable language, what that means is you're getting the original Medline data set indexed up until the start of this week, all the way back from 1946. And you're also getting InProcess, in data review citations. So that means items that are currently going through peer review, through checking. It's entirely possible that you might see citations there with an advanced publication date. So we might see things with an April or even a May publication date for this year. And then other non-index citations, that tends to refer to articles from either publications that perhaps aren't indexed to the same standard, so perhaps they're professional, paraprofessional journals, or they may be from publications in different parts of the world that perhaps don't have the same stringent indexing standards. But what that means in practical terms, if we boil it all down, is that you're going to find the widest range of literature possible, which is really important when it comes to systematic review. So that's the data set that we're going to start with. And what you'll notice here, this is absolutely key, this item should be checked by default, so map term to subject heading. And that is what allows us to start interrogating the control vocabulary. So we've mentioned control vocabulary a few times. What does that mean? So to try and break that down into slightly simpler terms, control vocabulary does a few things. So if you've ever searched the internet for anything, and I'm assuming, 3 years old and up have probably searched the internet for anything at this point, you'll know very well that you will tend to go to Google, think of a few words that describe your topic and hit enter. And you will find things that match the exact phrases that you've used. In a database like this, there's a control vocabulary or a taxonomy of words that sit behind the database. And each one of those words has been indexed and has a clear definition as to its usage in this database. So that means that somebody has indexed every single paper and used human logic to give it a set of index terms. So to give you a couple of examples, the reasons that this is useful, let's say that you're looking for information on strokes or heart attacks. So heart attacks, common parlance, everyday language. What this database will do for you is it will interpret your kind of, everyday parlance into medical diagnoses. So whether or not you know that the medical diagnosis for a heart attack is a myocardial infarction, whether you know that or not, this database is sophisticated enough to say, okay, I know what you're looking for. A myocardial infarction is what you'll find in the literature, and you can go ahead and add that without having to have any further information about how a heart attack is defined in medical terms. Another thing that control vocabulary can help you with is, let's say that you're interested in researching literature on dementia. And you haven't really thought too much about it yet, but you know that you would like to see, say, geriatric patients who are suffering from dementia. What you'll find when you go into the control vocabulary, and this is what it looks like, and I'm well aware that this can look a little bit intimidating the first time that you look at it. What you'll find here is that you've got a breakdown of more specific or more detailed diagnoses. So the further left we are on the screen, the more general the term is, the broader the term is, and the further right we go, the narrower that definition becomes. So at this point, it would be your job as the researcher, as the systematic reviewer, to say, well, am I interested in seeing examples of any type of dementia? Or do I specifically want to see Alzheimer's disease or Huntington's, for example? If you're only looking at geriatric patients, you might think, well, actually, AIDS dementia complex probably isn't relevant to the population that I'm looking at. So in that case, you might not want to include absolutely everything. You might just want to pick out the individual diagnoses that you are, in fact, interested in. And so already you can see how the control vocabulary is helping to guide you through what is actually relevant to your question, rather than just throwing, the whole kitchen sink into your search. So it's asking you to start really thinking about what it is that you're actually looking for. And then last of all, and this is where we'll start looking for our topic, last of all, it actually helps you to think about different types of terms, different synonyms, alternative keywords that might be relevant to your particular interest. So again, if we go back to Google, if we were looking for social media to fit this question, we would simply open up a Google page, type social media, and we would undoubtedly find millions and millions of results. But every single one of those results will have somewhere on the page the phrase social media. So far, so good. However, when we think about the volume of academia, of published works across the globe, how likely is it that every single researcher is using exactly the same phrase to describe the same diagnoses or phenomenon or even population group? We're working with global Englishes, English is plural there. So it's actually unlikely that everybody is using exactly the same phrase. Beyond that, you might be looking for more historic examples, particularly when it comes to different diagnoses or different treatments, drug treatments, interventions, and even with something like social media. If we were to go back 20 years, we were calling social media something a bit different. We were referring to social networking or Web 2.0. And so you can start to see that there are lots of different terms that can fall under the same category. So simply searching for social media probably isn't going to cut it when we're developing a protocol for systematic review. So to show you what I mean by this, if I search for social media, the database starts to check against the vocabulary to see what's relevant. You can see there is an entry for social media, so that's excellent news. I'm just going to move your faces out the way here so I can see my scope note. And on the right-hand side of the page, you'll notice there is a scope note for every single entry in the vocabulary. Now, if I click on this, what you'll find here is a list at the bottom of this definition. So platforms that provide the ability and tools to create and publish information via the internet, etc., etc. Great. That sounds like the right definition for us. What you'll also notice here is there is a list that says used for. Now, this is really important because what this is telling you is when you include this particular heading, this mesh term in your search, you are now automatically also searching for these terms as well. So wherever an indexer has seen any of these items referenced or listed in a particular paper, they have indexed it underneath the term social media, even if nowhere else in the paper is social media mentioned. You may just see Web 2.0 or Twitter messaging, but that human logic has said, aha, I know that this is about social media, so I'm going to include it under this definition. So I hope you can see already why this is such a powerful tool for systematic review. And as a little tip for you, you'd probably want to take a note of all of those terms, because when you're going to add that into your non-controlled vocabulary databases, you will in fact need to add all of these terms in manually. So this is doing us a lot of favors here just by simply going in and starting to add all of these extra terms. So let's go ahead and start to build up the first facet of our search, the social media search, and then I'll show you my best kind of Blue Peter effort of one I've devised earlier. So this is the process we would go through. We've searched for social media. We can see that there is in fact an entry. We've looked at the scope note and we know that it's exactly what we're looking for. The next thing we're going to do is go back into the taxonomy just to check whether there's anything more specific or anything additional that we would want to add. So social media is indexed underneath computer systems, computer communication networks, and then internet. Now, if I look up and down this list, there isn't really anything else that I would want to include here. So internet access, Internet of Things, none of those are really relevant. So I'm going to stick with social media. I'm going to click continue to add it to my search. And then for the next page, this is generally one that you can, I was going to say ignore, which seems like a bit of a harsh verb, but you can pretty much ignore this page for systematic review. What this page does is it suggests a list of subheadings that you might want to add into your search. So typically that's different branches of medicine. So if, for example, I'd searched for cancer, for oncology, it would perhaps suggest subheadings such as drug treatment, surgical intervention, palliative care, those kinds of things. By more or less, we don't really need to use this page for systematic review because we don't necessarily want to limit our search at this stage. So I'm just going to click continue. And you should be able to see, again, I'll move the faces out of the way. You should be able to see that this has created the first line in our search. These particular databases use line searching. So we have social media with a / that tells me that I've used a term from the control vocabulary, and that's given us over 15,000 results. But because we're designing a systematic review search, we don't want to just leave it at that. We want to make it a bit more complex. So I'm going to start searching for other terms that we might want to add in. So let's try, I mentioned this before, let's try social networking. And the database will check its index terms, and we can see that, yes, there is actually an entry for social networking. So let's have a quick look at the scope note. So social networking, individuals connected by family, work, or other interests. It also includes connectivity facilitated by computer-based communications. Now that's interesting because this suggests that the term social networking in this database does not necessarily just mean online social networking. So we want to be careful with that one because we don't want to suddenly include lots of face-to-face social networking. So let's take a look and see if we can be more specific. Okay, social networking. Aha, so we have online social networking. So in this instance, we're probably going to uncheck social networking and swap it to the more specific, more relevant item so that we don't end up with lots of face-to-face communication. So I'm going to add that in. I'm also going to try, specific platforms as well, because they might be a way of describing the topic in a particular article. So let's try Twitter. Okay, so in this case, you can see that there isn't an indexed term for Twitter, but it does give us the chance to add it as a keyword. The MP in this instance, by the way, stands for multi-purpose. So it's just going to treat the phrase, the word Twitter, as a keyword, just as you would on Google, and it'll search the title of the article, the indexed keywords, and the abstract. So we're going to go ahead and add that as a keyword because there's no other way to deal with it. So we can see twitter.mp, and then we'll do the same with, let's add in Facebook, and let's add in Instagram, and for good luck, let's have TikTok as well. And so you can now see I've got a range of different phrases to represent that particular facet of my search. I'm going to flip them around because it confuses me otherwise. So we've got social media and online social networking with forward slashes. That means that they are index terms. And then we also have keyword terms as well. And if you remember, when I described the data field that we were choosing from the first page list, the other non-index citations, if they are not indexed to this standard, this is a really good way of picking up some of those phrases as well. So it's a bit of a belt and braces approach to searching, which is especially useful for systematic review. So we could go ahead, we could add as many different terms as we might feel are necessary or relevant for our topic. And then we finish off by connecting them with an or. And now line 7 stands in for all of those different terms. We've connected them together and we have over 21,000 terms, results, for that particular aspect. So if I flip now to one that I created earlier, this is my Blue Peter effort. This is the full search put together so that you can see lines 1 to 8 are what we've just looked at. So online social networking, social media, etc. And then I've done the same thing for the other aspects of the question. So we've dealt with the well-being element. We've used self-esteem, self-image, self-concept, mental health, mental well-being, anxiety. And again, we've connected all of these in line 15. And then the final facet, we've looked at the population. So that was teenagers. We've used adolescent, teenager, young adult, young people. And again, we've connected these. And then the last thing that I've done here is I've limited the date range because that's specified in the question. And so that represents my search on Medline, having used the controlled vocabulary and the keyword searching to pull together everything. So it's really important to make sure that you're using both sets that are available to you. Check the taxonomy, go through the mesh headings, and make sure that you're using everything that's available to you. And now what we're going to look at is how you would take this complete search that you're happy with and start to transfer this into other databases. So the next database that we're going to look at is also under Ovid. It's another medical science database, and Marian's going to take you through the next one, and that is Embase. So I'm going to stop sharing so that Marian can take over, and she'll guide you through the next set.
Okay, so I'm going to jump over to Embase. Now it would seem logical, as there is an option here to change the database, to just change the database and rerun the search. But as we'll see in a minute, this isn't always the best way of doing it, because sometimes when you come to do the search, you'll find that the words, the headings are actually different, and sometimes the definitions are different as well. So I'm not going to just change the database and search. I'm going to go in and I'm starting from 1974 to the most recent stuff, and I'm going to start again. So I'm going to start where Amy started with the social media search. And again, I've got my little tick in here to map to the subject headings. Now in Embase, these are called M-tree headings. And if I get mixed up and start calling them mesh headings, I apologize in advance. But M-tree is the way that Embase has indexed their terms. So let's have a look at social media. So it's linking and mapping to the heading social media. So that's good. We've got one. So then if we look at that heading and see where it sits, now you'll see that the structure looks a little bit different in Embase to what it does in Medline, but it works in pretty much the same way. So here's social media, and here is a list of terms that it's used for. So when we look at the list of terms in Embase, we'll see that there's a lot more than what was in Medline. So in Medline, there were a few alternative terms, but not very many. And it might be that actually looking at these, there's some things that I've maybe missed when I did my Medline search. So I might want to go back and add some things in. There is a broader term of mass communication, but there aren't actually any narrower terms, which is fine. But again, just paying attention to what's here. So we can see straight away that Facebook, Instagram, TikTok and Twitter, they're all there, ones that we had thought of earlier. So that's good to know. So we've got the little tick into the heading. We'll continue at the top. And there's our result for social media. So you can see straight away that it's very, very similar. Now, I have prepared a search earlier as well, but I just want to illustrate one or two things that Embase is different. So we'll start with another term that we used, and that was online social networking. So again, I'm going to map to the M-tree terms, and you can see that it's very similar, but the heading is online social network. So that illustrates how sometimes things can be very similar, but not quite the same. Again, there's a broader term of social network, and it might be that that's what I'm interested in, or it might be that I'm sticking with the online. And in this case, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to continue with the search. So I'm just going to pop over to my prepared search. So you can see that I've done one or two lines of searching here for the social media aspect. I've exploded social media. I've done it also as a keyword search. So I'm being very belt and braces. I've done my online social network search as a term, as an M-tree term, but I've also added in the online social network. And what I've done is online social network star. So I've started introducing a bit of truncation. So that's going to look for alternative endings. So if it's talking about network or networks, it's going to find both. Now, I know that these things fit Facebook, Twitter, TikTok. Twitter I've got in twice there. I've obviously missed one out. Should have been Instagram. I've put these in as keyword searches as well. Although I know that they're covered, again, I'm being very belt and braces. But I might want to go back and have a look at some of those other terms that were suggested under the social media heading. So line number 9 is the combined searches of everything to do with social media, and they've been combined with all. So that would be the first element. So moving on to the second element, I'm going to have a look at back to Embase, and I'm going to have a look at self-image. This is one of the words that was in my list of terms when I started to break down the question. And you can see that mapping my language of self-image has taken me to this subject heading of self-concept. So if I have a look at self-concept, you can see that it's used for quite a lot of things, and self-image is in there. Broader term of personality, but in this case, lots of narrower terms. Now, it might be that some of these are not relevant, but just having a look through, bearing in mind that we're talking about social media and adolescence, it might be that body image is something I would think about. Self-esteem. Now, I think self-esteem was also one of the headings that we had. So it might be that we could just tick in there, or again, we could use this function over here, explored, which would include all of these narrower terms. So just for the sake of this example, I'm just going to include the narrower terms as well. So you can see that's a huge result, and it might be that that's a bit of a red herring, that really I need to go back and I need to look specifically at the narrower terms. Otherwise the search is maybe going to be throwing up one or two erroneous references. So going back to the search in Embase, you can see that self-concept has been exploded, but again, I've done my multi-purpose search, searching the title, the abstract, and the keywords for self-image, self-esteem. And I've also found some other headings. I found an Emtree term for mental health, but I did my keyword search as well. Now, I found here a mesh term, psychological well-being. Now, just to illustrate how I found that term in Embase, one of my listed subject terms was mental well-being. So when I searched for mental well-being, it actually mapped to this psychological well-being term. So that illustrates why it's a really good idea that we started to search again in Embase from scratch, and we put in our language and allow the system to map to what's actually in the terms. So there are broader terms. Now, in this case, there is a broader term of mental health, which I probably would use in my search anyway, but it might be that I just want to go with the psychological well-being. So it's worth looking at the structure, looking how the headings are placed to see what would be useful. And again, we've got some used for terms that might be useful, something that we would have to, maybe in this case, find out what it meant, because not sure what that means, but being familiar with the subject, you might be. So we could do that search as well. So going back to the mental well-being part of the search, I found another couple of examples here, anxiety and anxiety disorder. So again, if I'm here and I'm searching for the terms, I'm looking for anxiety. And again, I've got a list, and this is where the anxiety disorder was found, something that hadn't been listed in my original term. So again, I can go into the terms, I can have a look where they sit. Lots of narrower terms, maybe relevant, maybe not. I think I'm not going to explore that term. I'll just continue with the search. I'll go back to the anxiety. Oops, that won't work. Let's try that instead. And I'll go to anxiety disorders. Again, I'll have a look. Mental disease is a broader term, but we've got some narrower terms in here as well. So it might be that in this case, not many of them are terribly relevant, but I think we'll have this one and maybe this one, maybe this one and this one. So I can select a few rather than just use the explored. So as I go through my search, looking at each element, I'm going into the structure, I'm deciding what's relevant and what's not. So back to my search. Here's my well-being aspect. I'm happy with what I've got now, and I've combined all those together in line number 10, line number 19, using OR. So now I'm going to move on to the third concept. So I'll just go back to Embase again to illustrate this one. So if we have a look at adolescent, you can see that there is a heading for adolescent. So when we look at that heading, you can see that it's used for teenager. So I know that if I search for adolescent, I'm going to be including teenager as well. Interestingly, here's another term that I haven't thought of. Juvenile wasn't in the Medline search either. So is this something that we're going to want to include in the search? So that's something else that we need to think about. So I'll just search for adolescent in this case, and that's it. You can see indicated there by the slash. So going back to my search in Embase, I've put in a few headings for adolescent. I've searched for the term. I've used the truncation, the star or the wildcard. So I'm going to get adolescence, adolescent, and other alternatives. I've been very belt and braces here, and I've done teen star. I know that I don't need to search for teenager, but if I'm going to find any articles on teen, teens, or teenager, I can also do the keyword search. And I've added in some of the things that I thought about in my original breakdown, as in young adult, young person, put in my juvenile, and searched for youth. So line 28 is the adolescent part of the search completed, combined together with or. And then line 29 is social media, mental well-being, and adolescence. And that's my result. And then I've put my limit on from 2011. So hopefully that illustrates that it's a good idea not to just rerun the search, but to start again and to just see where your words that you put into Embase would take you in the control vocabulary, and offer some other suggestions as to what you might want to add in. So now I think I'm probably going to have to get together with Amy and say, well, actually, I think there's a couple of things that we need to go back to Medline and think about that. So that's covering Embase. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to hand back to Amy, who is going to think about transferring this search into Scopus. So we're moving on now from looking at the control vocabulary to keyword searching. Thank you, Amy.
Okay, thanks, Marion. Right, so both of the databases we've just looked at are hosted on Ovid. They are, but I mean, they have different control vocabularies, as Marion pointed out, but they are both control vocabulary searching. So they use the same interface, they use the same process of line searching. So often a difficulty can arise when you're looking at transferring a search from a control vocabulary database into a keyword database, a non-control vocabulary database. And you might be thinking, well, why would I do that? Because you've just been telling me all the reasons that control vocabulary databases are so wonderful and have such great functionality. Why would I bother using a keyword database? Well, when you're doing a systematic review, one of your jobs as the reviewer is to try and find, in theory, I always say this with a slight laugh because it just seems like such an impossible task, but in theory, you are trying to find everything that has ever been published that fits your research question. It seems quite daunting, doesn't it? You are trying to attempt to find everything that has ever been published. And so that necessitates searching a range of different databases. Now, when you move over to a keyword database, you're looking often at large interdisciplinary databases. So the first one we're looking at is Scopus. There are some 90 million records in Scopus. It covers the breadth of academia. So in an institution like this, you will find papers indexed from archaeology journals, architecture journals, veterinary science journals, chemistry journals. It covers the full gamut of academic subjects. Now, that's particularly useful if you are looking at a topic that is interdisciplinary, public health in focus. It's likely that you would be interested in also picking up references to, say, public health, education, sociology. There's a lot of different topics implied in some of these big interdisciplinary research institute topics. So really, really useful to look at these types of databases. Beyond that, you're also looking at a wider breadth of formats. So something like Scopus also includes and indexes conference proceedings, and that gives you a nice big fat tick in the grey literature box as well. So it's doing a few different things for you that are in fact really useful. So we would encourage you to make use of a range of different databases, even if they're not, you know, the librarian standard of controlled vocabulary searching. So if I share my screen with you again. Okay, so we are now in Scopus. Again, let me move some of this out of the way. Scopus, as I say, large interdisciplinary keyword database. The very first tip here is to make sure that you're making use of the advanced search option. So the default page when you come onto one of these databases is usually the basic search, much more friendly, user-friendly for undergrads particularly. You can go ahead and, you know, add as many of these different fields as you like to build up your search. But let's face it, when we're dealing with a large systematic review search, you're going to be there all day adding extra field boxes. So by and large, we want to go with the advanced search option. And what we find here is quite a different format for pulling together your search. So particularly if you've just come from a line searching database like Embase, like Medline, this looks quite different. And we often find, depending on your faculty of origin, that you're much more comfortable with one or the other. So our clinical medicine students and staff, they are very comfortable with the line searching because it's what they're used to, it's what they've seen. If you're from HAS or even some SAGE schools, you're probably more used to building up a search in this way. So it is a bit of a change. But what you're doing here is you're pulling together the different facets of your search in brackets, in parenthesis. So where we added, say, 8 different lines for the topics around social media, joined them together, and then another 8 lines for well-being, here you're packaging them neatly into parenthesis. So if we start with social media, one of the first differences here is that you are going to want to indicate that you're searching for this as a phrase. Now, this wasn't necessary back in Ovid. You don't need to identify phrases, but here we do, because otherwise what we're going to find are results that mention perhaps social up in the abstract and then media down in the body of the text, and that's no good to us. We want to see social media as a phrase. So same with social networking. And here with social networking, we can make use of Marian's truncation tip. So social network, networks, or networking. We're going to add in some of the platforms that we identified, and we're connecting them all with great big ORs to indicate that any of these are satisfactory, or Twitter. And then in between the brackets, we want to add an and, because that's the equivalent of joining them together at the end. So in the next set of brackets, we'd be adding teen. Ooh. For teenagers, teen-aged, teenager, young people. Adolescent, and so on and so forth. One more thing that we do need to do here is we need to put a field code in front of the brackets. So we're joining our items with an or, we're adding our different truncation, our different phrase searching. We also need to tell the database where we would like it to search those different brackets. So the simplest version is this, all. Now, what that will do is it will search the entirety of the indexed fields of the article. So for some articles, that's just the key terms, the title, the abstract. For some that are deep data mined and have the entire article indexed, you will be searching the entire article for those words. Chances are that's probably a little bit too in depth. So we probably want to use this field code. So title abs key. And what that will do is it will search the keywords that you've indicated against the title of the article, not the journal, the article, the abstract, and the indexed keywords. And usually that's sufficient. If you're looking for something that's very niche, very perhaps recent to the field, it may be that you'd want to use all to search the entire article. But if you're dealing with anything along the lines of dementia or oncology or forms of public health, that's probably a bit too much. You're probably going to return far too many results for you to be able to handle. So this is probably sufficient. So title, abstract, key, and again here, and then we would continue to build up the search with all the other elements as well. And what I will do is flip to my Blue Peter screen to show you what I've done here. So title, abstract, key, social media as a phrase, or Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, online social networking, Web 2.0. Do you remember all those different words that were in the used for list on Medline? We've poached them all to use here because we know that we're not using that control vocabulary. We don't have that functionality. So any single synonym, any keyword that's relevant, throw them all in. Make sure you're wrapping the phrases in quotation marks. Make use of truncation wherever possible. A couple of other tips that you may want to use. There is another operator called a wildcard. Now, this changes between databases, so it's always worth having a look in the help index because, as I say, different databases use slightly different variations. And again, we don't learn them all off by heart, so we don't expect you to. In some databases, it's a $sign. In some, it's a question mark. But what you would use that for is in place of one letter or more than one letter inside a word. So to give you an example, rather than typing woman or women, you could simply use a wildcard to stand in for the A or the E. It's also very useful for the disambiguation of, say, British and American English, where there are extra U's in British English terms. So that's another useful operator that can help you. So we've got all of our social media terms. We've connected that to a bracket with all of the well-being terms. So mental health, mental well-being, anxiety disorder, all of the terms that have come up in Embase and Medline. A very quick note about hyphens or hyphenation. In Scopus, it's not necessary to include both the hyphenated and non-hyphenated variations of a word. When it searches for something like self-image, it will find you both hyphenated and non-hyphenated, so you don't need to worry too much about that. And then we have our population terms, so adolescents, adolescent, teen, young people, etc., etc. And we also have our date range as well. So as I say, it looks very different to the line searching in Medline, but it's performing the same function. It's grouping together your facets in brackets. So this is the largest interdisciplinary database. You may also want to look at others as well. And I'm just going to show you Web of Science very, very briefly, just to highlight a couple of differences. So Web of Science, again, interdisciplinary, uses the same style of parenthesis. But one thing I did want to point out here in my Blue Peter search was that sometimes the field codes can be different and can perform different functions. So whereas in Scopus we had title, abstract, key, you're likely to find that when you move to different databases, you don't have the same options available to you. So the closest that we can find in Web of Science is TS, and that actually stands for topic. So you're not exactly replicating the search, you're doing the best you can with what's available to you. And the reason I'm pointing that out is that's something you will find across different databases. You're not going to be able to 100% replicate your search across every database because sometimes the functionality or the options available to you are just different. There are some interfaces, and Marian's going to mention grey literature and some of the hints and tips. There are some interfaces in grey literature sites that have the most basic of interfaces. I mean, I'm thinking about things like gov.uk for official papers. the chances of you being able to fit more than about 5 different keywords into those particular search boxes is very slim. And in that case, again, you just have to do the best job that you can, because it's pretty much impossible to replicate your search entirely. So again, your job as the reviewer to do the best with the interfaces that you're given. And again, another reason that we suggest you start with the more complex of the searches and then move down to the simpler ones, rather than the other way around. So that's the difference between controlled vocabulary and keywords. I'm going to pass you back to Marion for some hints and tips, and I'll jump on some of the questions in the chat.
Just moving you out of the way to get back to the PowerPoint. So just to finish off, just a quick summary of what we've been looking at, and also some hints and tips. So we started off with Medline, and we were searching the MESH subject headings. So always remember that, you know, the system will map to the words that you put in and find the best match that it can. And if you can find a MESH heading, it's great to be able to search with those. But if not, you've always got the option of this .mp, this multi-purpose search, searching the title, abstract, and any headings that have been assigned. Embase is the Emtree subject headings. They might be different to the MESH ones. So just remember, starting again, putting in your words, making sure they are the same. And if you need to, checking the scope note to make sure that the definition is the same. Don't just rerun the search. In terms of Scopus and Web of Science, the keyword searching databases, you can search all the keywords and phrases. So any of the MESH terms or Emtree terms that you've found, you can use these as phrases. Just make sure you put them in the quotation marks, and you can add those in to your Scopus and Web of Science searches. And just make sure to check the field codes. What fields are you actually searching? So you're not going to get a result that's absolutely huge and unmanageable. So now for the hints and tips. One of the things that you can do is, once you've got your search, you can save it. Obviously, that's what Amy and I had done with our Blue Peter searches. We'd run the search and saved it. All of the databases allow you to do that. You can set up an account and then save the search, and it allows you to rerun the search anytime you want. Also, it might be that if you are running searches at a later date, you'll be changing the dates on the searches, then you can keep account of when things were done. And for those who are doing systematic reviews and using the Prisma flow diagram, there is a requirement to record the results. So when you first do the search, how many results did you get? And then when you move on to deduplicating the results and screening the results, again, you need to keep account of the numbers. It does help you to be able to do that. We would strongly encourage you to be managing your references in some way, whether that's using EndNote or Mendeley, Zotero, another piece of software. It's fine. Do get to grips with one of them. What you don't want to be doing is 6 months down the line looking for those references when you come to actually write your written work. When you're generating your search protocol, break down your question and then start with a controlled vocabulary database. You're doing a lot of the hard work, finding those terms, those different subject headings and keywords that you can then transfer into the other databases. I would say that searching is an iterative cycle. There's never a perfect search first time. You always have to go back and have a look and add and maybe change. So don't worry too much about that. Just keep going with the search. And lastly, looking at grey literature. So you would want to transfer this search into whatever grey literature you have to search for. And that is often means that you have to pare back the search and make it a bit more basic. An example here of the government website that Amy was talking about is just a very basic search box. And it might be that, mental well-being or mental health and social media is as good as it's going to get. Or it might be that you need to do 2 or 3 searches, maybe mental health and Facebook, mental health and Twitter, something like that, 2 or 3 searches that are going to make sure that you don't miss anything that might be on that particular database or website. Similarly, if you're looking at theses, if you're looking at grey literature, you probably will include theses. ProQuest dissertation abstracts, again, it's a very basic search box. Again, it's going to have to be a more pared back search to allow you to interrogate the database well. I've included some links here to some guides. So we do have a grey literature guide where we'll give you some ideas about where you need to go to search for the grey literature relevant to your subject. And from that guide, you can link to the Theses and Dissertations Guide, the Government Publications Guide, and also the Conferences Guide. So it's quite good. Conference proceedings could be another useful grey literature resource for you to use. I've also added a link on the bottom there to the Systematic Review Guide. If you are doing a systematic review and you haven't been to the guide yet, it's worth going and having a look. It just gives you a bit of a breakdown of the process, but in the searching section of the guide, there's some really good hints and tips to be able to help you on your way, as well as links to database workbooks and videos if you want to refresh on what you're doing with the individual databases.